For 200 years, a letter lay dormant, sealed within a forgotten box. It waited in the silent darkness of a cellar. It waited as wars ignited and faded, as empires crumbled into dust, as generations bloomed and withered away. And today, you are about to discover for whom this letter yearned. You are about to witness what unfolds when a 2-century-old promise finally seeks out the souls it was destined for. If you've ever felt an inexplicable connection to someone you've just met, this story will resonate deeply. Jonathan Ashworth, a man of 42 winters, had long abandoned the notion of true love. Heir to one of the nation's most venerable families, he oversaw a financial empire, painstakingly built over centuries. His historic estate, dating back to the 1700s, housed treasures he'd never bothered to unearth until that afternoon. The afternoon of October 23rd, 2025, it began innocuously enough. Jonathan was immersed in work in his study when a strange noise drifted up from the cellar. He summoned the housekeeper. Mrs. Eleanor, a woman of 78, had dedicated 5 decades to the estate. She knew every nook and cranny of the old house, every secret whispered through its walls, every legend passed down through generations of staff. "Shall I investigate, sir?" she inquired, her voice raspy with age. Jonathan rose from his desk. "No, I'll see to it myself." He descended the stone steps, leading into the cellar's depths. The dim light revealed layers of accumulated history, stacked boxes, furniture draped in white sheets, forgotten paintings leaning against the walls. And then he saw it. A dark wooden box, unlike any other in the room. It bore a red wax seal, emblazoned with the Ashworth family crest. A crest Jonathan recognized instantly. It was the same one etched on his signet ring. He tried to open it. The seal resisted. For 2 centuries, this box had remained undisturbed. Jonathan felt a surge of something, an inexplicable urgency, as if this box had been waiting, specifically, for him. Not for his father, not for his grandfather, but for him. He carried the box to his study, with painstaking care, for he broke the seal. The wax crumbled as if finally allowed to rest. Inside lay 3 objects: a military medal of tarnished bronze, aged by time, a small portrait of a young woman, framed in tarnished silver, and a letter. Jonathan picked up the letter. The paper was yellowed and fragile, but remarkably intact. The handwriting trembled in places, as if penned by someone overwhelmed or hurried, or perhaps both. He began to read. "My beloved Evelyn Marie," the letter began. "By the time you read these words, Guy, I will have marched off to battle, but I must have you know that my heart remains with you, always has. From the very instant our eyes met at the governor's ball, I knew my soul had recognized yours." A shiver crawled down Jonathan's spine. The letter continued. "They tell us we are enemies, that your father fights for the Republican cause, and I for the Royalist. But love knows no banners. Love respects no boundaries. Love, my Evelyn, is greater than any war." Jonathan's heart pounded. There was something in those words, something that resonated within a part of him he didn't even know existed. "If I do not return from this battle, I want you to know. I want you to hold this promise close, within the deepest chamber of your heart." Jonathan turned the page in his hands, trembling. "I will return for you in this life or the next. My soul will find you." He read the words again. "I will return for you." And it was at that exact moment he heard footsteps. The study door creaked open. Evelyn Marie Santos, a young woman of 28 summers, worked as a housekeeper at the estate. She had been orphaned since the age of 5, never knowing her parents, never knowing where she came from. She possessed only a name and a persistent feeling that she was waiting for something or someone. She entered, carrying a tray with coffee, the same routine as always. But when her eyes locked with Jonathan's, something happened. Jonathan felt the world stop. It wasn't a metaphor. For a second that stretched into what felt like hours, everything around him vanished. There was only Evelyn, standing in the doorway with those honey-colored eyes that he felt him inexplicably. Look, he already knew. The tray trembled in her hands. Evelyn felt it too. "Excuse me, sir," she murmured. "Did you call for me?" Jonathan couldn't speak. He stared at the letter, then at Evelyn, then back at the letter. The handwriting, the script in the letter. It was identical to the handwriting Evelyn used. When leaving notes in the kitchen, Jonathan's heart nearly stopped. "Impossible," he whispered. "Sir." Jonathan picked up the letter. "I need you to write something for me." Evelyn frowned, confused. "Of course, sir. What would you like me to write?" "Anything, just write." She placed the tray on the table. Jonathan handed her paper and a pen. Evelyn wrote her full name, Evelyn Marie Santos. Jonathan compared the handwriting, the capital E, the elegant S, the way the A's curved. They were identical. The handwriting from a letter penned in 1820 was exactly the same as the handwriting of his housekeeper in 2025. How is this possible? Jonathan muttered to himself. Evelyn gazed at the yellowed letter in his hands. Something about that paper drew her in. Something about that handwriting made her heart clench in a way she couldn't explain. "May I ask what that is, sir?" Jonathan hesitated. Then he handed her the letter. "Tell me what you feel when you read this." Evelyn took the paper carefully. Her eyes scanned the first lines. And then something strange happened. Tears began to stream down her face. She didn't know why she was crying. There was no logical reason. It was just an old letter. But the words pierced her heart, as if they had been written for her, as if she had read them before, as if she knew them by heart. "My beloved Evelyn Marie," she read aloud, her voice trembling. Jonathan watched her. His heart beat so loudly, he could hear it. Evelyn reached the end of the letter. The final words, "I will return for you. In this life, or the next, my soul will find you." She raised her eyes, meeting Jonathan's, and in that moment, they both knew. They couldn't explain what. They couldn't rationalize it. But somewhere beyond logic, beyond time, beyond everything they knew, something recognized itself. "Sir," Evelyn murmured, "I know these words." "How?" She hesitated. "I dreamed them. Ever since I can remember." Jonathan felt his legs weaken. He slumped into the nearest chair. "How long have you had these dreams?" "Forever," she said. "Since I was a child. I dream of a man in a military uniform. He's writing a letter. It's dark. He cries as he writes. And I know those words are for me, but I could never read them. I could never see what he was writing. Until now." Jonathan stared at the letter in his hands. "What else do you see in these dreams?" Evelyn closed her eyes. "I see an old estate. Not this one. Another, older. I see horses, soldiers, a war, and I see..." She opened her eyes, startled by her own words. "I see you." "Me?" "Not exactly you, but someone like you, with your face and but younger, in a uniform, and a medal on his chest." Jonathan glanced at the bronze medal resting in the box. "A medal like this?" Evelyn stared at the object. Her breath hitched. "That's..." She reached out but stopped before touching it. "May I?" Jonathan nodded. Evelyn picked up the medal. The moment her fingers brushed the cold bronze, she felt a wave of dizziness. Images flashed. A battlefield, horses, blood, and a man falling, with that same medal on his chest. She dropped the medal as if it burned her. "What was it?" Evelyn was pale. I saw him die." "Who?" "The man who wrote the letter. He was on a field. There was so much blood. He fell clutching the medal, and the last thing he thought—" Evelyn looked at Jonathan, tears welling in her eyes. "The last thing he thought was of the woman he was writing to." The silence that followed was so dense Jonathan could practically feel it. "You know who wrote this letter?" Evelyn shook her head. "No." Jonathan looked at the broken wax seal, the Ashworth family crest. "I know," he said. "It was an Ashworth, my ancestor, from 200 years ago." Evelyn looked at the box, at the letter, at Jonathan. "But why is the handwriting the same as mine?" Jonathan had no answer. At least, not yet. It was then that Mrs. Eleanor appeared in the doorway. The elderly housekeeper took in the scene. She saw the open box, the letter, the medal, and the portrait that still lay inside the box, untouched. "You found it," she said simply. Jonathan turned to her. "You knew about this?" Mrs. Eleanor entered the study. Her expression was that of someone who'd kept a secret for too long. "My grandmother worked in this house," and where she began, "and her grandmother before her. Each housekeeper in this family passed a story on to the next, a legend about a sealed box that should never be opened, until the two souls returned to find it." "The two souls," Jonathan repeated. Mrs. Eleanor looked at Evelyn, then at Jonathan. "The legend said that one day the same souls that were separated in 1820 would return, and when they did, the box could finally be opened. The promise could finally be fulfilled." Jonathan felt a chill crawl down his spine. "You're saying that—" "I'm saying that for 5 generations, every housekeeper has tried to open this box. The seal never broke. Until today. Until you came downstairs alone and brought it up. Until Evelyn was here when you read the letter." "This is impossible," Jonathan said, trying to regain his rationality. "They're just coincidences." As Mrs. Eleanor approached the box, "There's still something you haven't seen." She picked up the small silver-framed portrait that remained inside. "When you turn this portrait over, Mr. Ashworth, your life will never be the same. Are you sure you want to see it?" Jonathan looked at Evelyn. She looked as confused as he was, as frightened and as strangely certain that they needed to see. "Show it," he said. Mrs. Eleanor turned the portrait. Jonathan and Evelyn looked at it at the same time. What they saw made Evelyn need to lean on the table to keep from falling. The portrait showed a young woman, dark hair, hazel eyes, a period dress, and a gentle smile that seemed to hold a secret. The woman in the portrait was identical to Evelyn, not similar. Identical. The same features, the same gaze, the same birthmark on the corner of her neck that Evelyn always tried to hide under her hair. "Evelyn," Jonathan whispered. She couldn't speak. She stared at the portrait as if she were looking into a mirror from 200 years ago. Mrs. Eleanor pointed to a small inscription on the frame. "Evelyn Marie de los Rios, 1803 to 1828. Died of sorrow, waiting for her beloved to return. Evelyn Marie Santos. An orphan since the age of 5. No true last name, just a name that the friars at the orphanage chose for her. Evelyn. The same name." "I need air," Evelyn murmured and rushed out of the study. Jonathan made to follow her, but Mrs. Eleanor stopped him. "Give her a moment, sir. What she's just discovered would change anyone." Jonathan stared at the door Evelyn had disappeared through. "What is happening here, Eleanor?" The elderly housekeeper sighed. "What I'm about to tell you, sir, goes against everything the modern world believes. It goes against science, against religion, and against logic. But it's the truth this family has guarded for 200 years. Jonathan sat down. "Tell me." "In 1820, your ancestor, Captain Sebastian Ashworth, fell in love with the daughter of an enemy general. Her name was Evelyn Marie de los Rios. Her father fought for the Republican side. Sebastian fought for the Royalists. It was an impossible love. Forbidden. Doomed. Jonathan looked at the letter. On the night before the final battle, Sebastian wrote that letter. He promised he would return. He promised that not even death could separate them. He promised that his soul would find her, in this life or the next. And what happened? Sebastian died in battle the next day. A shot to the chest, exactly where the medal was. Evelyn Marie received the news weeks later. She never recovered, never married. She spent the next 8 years waiting, believing in the promise. And then she died at 25 years old. They say of a broken heart. But before she died, she gave very specific instructions. The box with the letter, the medal, and her own portrait should be sealed, and it could only be opened when Sebastian returned. Jonathan felt a tightness in his chest. You actually believe that? You opened the box that no one could open for 200 years. Evelyn has the same handwriting as Evelyn Marie, the same name, the same face, the same dreams about the night the letter was written. Do you really think they're just coincidences? Jonathan didn't know what to think anymore. I don't believe in reincarnation, he said, more to himself than to Mrs. Eleanor. Perhaps you don't need to believe, sir. Perhaps you just need to remember. If you are feeling something different watching this story, if something resonated inside of you in a way that you cannot explain, that means you understand what Jonathan was beginning to realize. Jonathan stood up. He needed to find Evelyn. He found her in the garden, seated on the bench beneath the old fig tree, a tree that had stood on the historic estate for centuries. She was weeping silently. Jonathan sat beside her. He said nothing, just remained there. After what seemed like long minutes, Evelyn spoke. My entire life, sir, I felt like I was waiting for something, or someone. I never knew what it was. I never understood why I felt so incomplete. Why? Even surrounded by people, I felt alone. In a way, I couldn't explain. Jonathan listened in silence. And these dreams, she continued, these dreams with the man writing the letter, with the battle, with his death. I wake up crying. My heart aches as if I've lost someone I love. But I've never loved anyone. Not truly. It's as if my heart was already occupied by someone I didn't know. Jonathan felt a pang in his chest, not of sadness, but of recognition. Me too, he said softly. Evelyn looked at him, surprised. I too have never loved anyone, he continued. I've never been able to connect with another person. My family has pressured me for years to marry, have children, continue the Ashworth lineage, but I always felt like something was missing, or someone. Their eyes met. And when you walked into that office today, Jonathan said, when our eyes met, I felt like I'd finally found it. Evelyn didn't look away. I felt it too. The sun was beginning to set. The golden light painted the garden in shades of orange and rose. It was as if the universe was illuminating that moment, that reunion. But they didn't know everything yet. There were more clues waiting to be discovered, and the biggest revelation was yet to come. Jonathan looked at Evelyn. He noticed something he'd never perceived before, a small mark on her neck, a birthmark she always hid beneath her hair. May I see? He asked, pointing to the mark. Evelyn hesitated. Then she moved her hair aside. The mark had a strange shape, almost circular, with jagged edges. It looked like a scar, but Evelyn knew she'd been born with it. Jonathan felt his blood run cold. He knew exactly what that mark was, because in the letter, Sebastian described Evelyn Marie's birthmark, a mark on her neck, circular, with jagged edges. He wrote that it was his favorite place to kiss her, that it was where his soul had left a mark, to find her in other lives. Evelyn, Jonathan whispered. The letter mentions this mark. What? Sebastian wrote about it. 200 years ago. Evelyn brought her hand to her neck, the mark she'd always tried to hide. The mark she'd never been able to explain. He said he would leave a mark to find her, Jonathan continued. To be sure he would recognize her, no matter how many lives passed. Evelyn began to tremble. This can't be true, she murmured. Jonathan took her hands. I want to believe it's not too. But look at the evidence, the handwriting, the portrait, the dreams, the mark. How else can we explain all of this? Evelyn had no answer. But her heart did. Her heart knew something her mind refused to accept. That she had been on that historic estate before. That she had loved Jonathan before. That the pain she carried her entire life wasn't hers. It was Evelyn Marie's. It was from a woman who waited 8 years for a man who promised to return. And now, 200 years later, he had returned. But Evelyn still wasn't ready to accept it. Sir, she said, standing up. I need time. This is too much. I'm your housekeeper. I can't. We can't. Jonathan also stood up. Evelyn, please. She stepped back. I need to think. And she ran to the staff quarters. Jonathan remained alone in the garden. The sun had set. The first stars were appearing in the sky. And Jonathan Ashworth, the man who had never believed in love, who had never believed in destiny, who had never believed in anything beyond what he could see and touch, stood there looking at the stars, thinking that maybe, just maybe, some promises were strong enough to cross centuries. Maybe some souls were connected in ways that science couldn't explain. And maybe, just maybe, he had spent 200 years trying to fulfill a promise he didn't even remember making. I will return for you, in this life or the next. My soul will find you. Had he really returned? Would the promise finally be fulfilled? That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He stayed in his room, looking at the letter, reading and rereading every word, trying to find a rational explanation for everything that had happened. He found none. In the staff quarters, Evelyn also wasn't sleeping. She stared at the dark ceiling, thinking about everything she'd discovered that day, about the portrait that was her exact copy, about the letter that seemed to have been written for her, about the 200-year-old promise. And she thought about Jonathan, about the look in his eyes when their eyes met, about the feeling that she already knew him, about the inexplicable certainty that she belonged by his side. But how? She was a housekeeper. He was a millionaire. In what world could these two people be together? Then she remembered. In 1823, they were from different worlds too. She was the daughter of a prominent Boston merchant. He was an immigrant from England. Enemies to her father and his business at first, but their shared love of theater transcended the world. The only thing that would keep them apart was death. And now, death hadn't succeeded either. Evelyn sat up in bed. Her heart was racing. If it was true, if they really were the same souls. Then the social difference between them was insignificant. Then nothing could separate them. Nothing they hadn't already overcome before. But there was still one unanswered question: how to be sure? The next morning, Jonathan woke up with a determination. He needed proof. Concrete proof. Historical. Something that would confirm or deny everything that had happened. He called a friend who was a historian at Harvard and scheduled a meeting for that same afternoon. Meanwhile, Evelyn tried to maintain her routine. She cleaned the historic estate as she did every day, but her hands trembled. Her mind wandered. Every room in the house seemed to whisper ancient secrets. That's when she came to the music room. There was an old grand piano in the corner. Evelyn had never played the piano. She had never had lessons. She had never had the money for it. But something pulled her to the instrument. She sat on the bench, looked at the black and white keys, and then, without thinking, her hands began to move. A melody emerged, an old waltz. A song that Evelyn had never heard before, but her fingers knew the keys, like they were old friends, across the historic estate. Jonathan heard the music. A chill ran down his spine. He knew that melody. It was the same one his grandmother used to hum, an old tune, she'd said, from the time of Captain Sebastian, a waltz he composed for his beloved. Jonathan rushed to the music room. He found Evelyn Marie playing. Her eyes were closed when tears streamed down her face, playing a song she shouldn't know, a song composed 200 years ago. "Evelyn," he called out. She opened her eyes and stopped playing, looked at her own hands as if she didn't recognize them. I don't know how I did that," she said. "I've never played piano. I never." "I know," Jonathan interrupted. "I know exactly what's happening." That afternoon, the historian arrived at the Ashworth family Crest Historic Estate, Professor Charles Abernathy. He was a specialist in the American Revolutionary War period. He'd been studying that era for 30 years. Jonathan showed him the box, the letter, the medal, the portrait. The professor was silent for long minutes, examining each item with almost reverential care. "Where did you find this?" he finally asked. "In the basement. It was sealed shut. No one could open it." The professor looked at Jonathan with an expression that mixed astonishment and skepticism. "You know what's here?" Jonathan shook his head. "I've researched Captain Sebastian Ashworth for years," the professor said. "He was a legendary figure, one of the best strategists in the Continental Army, but he was also known for a scandal, a forbidden love affair with the daughter of a British general, Evelyn Marie de los Rios," Jonathan completed. The professor's eyes widened. "You know the story. Only what the letter tells." The professor took the letter with trembling hands, read each word. When he finished, there were tears in his eyes. "This is extraordinary," he said. "I always thought the letter was a legend. They said Sebastian wrote a final letter before the battle, a love letter, a promise, but no one ever found it." Jonathan felt a cold shiver. "There's something else you should know," he said, and he called for Evelyn Marie. When Evelyn Marie entered the study, the professor almost fell out of his chair. "Impossible," he murmured. "What?" The professor stood up, approached Evelyn Marie, looked at her as if he were seeing a ghost. "There's a portrait of Evelyn Marie de los Rios in the National Portrait Gallery," he said. "I've seen it hundreds of times, studied every detail of that face, and you're identical to her." Evelyn Marie looked at Jonathan. "Show him," Jonathan said. "Show him the mark." Evelyn Marie pushed her hair aside, revealed the birthmark on her neck. The professor staggered back. "In the historical archives," he said in a trembling voice. "There's a physical description of Evelyn Marie, made by a doctor who attended to her before she died. She had a birthmark on her neck. Circular, irregular edges. Exactly like that." The silence that followed was absolute. "Professor," Jonathan said finally, "what do you think is happening here?" The historian looked from Jonathan to Evelyn Marie, from the letter to the portrait, from the medal to the birthmark on her neck. "I'm a man of science," he said. "I believe in facts, in documents, in evidence, and all the evidence I see here points to a single conclusion, a conclusion that my rational mind refuses to accept." "And what is that conclusion?" The professor took a deep breath. "That somehow, impossibly, the two souls who loved each other and were separated in 1781 found a way to return and fulfill the promise they made." Evelyn Marie felt her legs weaken. She sat down in the nearest chair. Jonathan looked at her, then at the letter, at the words that were starting to make sense in a way he never imagined. "I will return for you, in this life or the next. My soul will find you." He had returned, and so had she. But one more piece of evidence was needed, the definitive proof. "Professor," Jonathan said, "you mentioned a portrait in the National Portrait Gallery." "Yes, an official portrait of Evelyn Marie de los Rios, painted in 1780. I need to see it." The professor nodded. "I can arrange access for tomorrow." In the next few days, things began to change at the historic estate. Jonathan no longer treated Evelyn Marie as a housekeeper. He couldn't. Every time he looked at her, he saw Evelyn Marie de los Rios, saw the woman who had waited 8 years for him, the woman who died of a broken heart. And Evelyn Marie could no longer keep him at a distance. Every time their eyes met, she felt something that transcended any logical explanation, a connection so deep that it seemed to have roots in another life, because it did. Mrs. Eleanor watched everything in silence. The old housekeeper had spent 50 years guarding the secret of that box, waiting for the moment when the two souls would return, and now she was seeing the promise fulfilled. One night, Jonathan found Evelyn Marie in the garden. She was sitting on the same bench under the oak tree, looking at the stars. He sat down next to her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn Marie broke the silence. "Do you think it's possible," she asked, "to love someone you knew in another life?" Jonathan looked at her hazel eyes, at the mark on her neck, at everything she was, and everything he felt she had always been. "I think it's already happening," he replied. Evelyn Marie looked at him. Her eyes shone with tears. "I'm afraid," she confessed. "Afraid that this is a dream, that I'll wake up and you won't be here anymore, that I'll lose you again." Jonathan took her hands. "Last time, I promised I'd return, and I did. It took 200 years, but I'm back. And this time, I'm not going anywhere." Evelyn Marie looked at him. Then, slowly, rested her head on his shoulder. They stayed like that for hours, without speaking, just feeling, remembering, recognizing. Two souls that had crossed 200 years to find each other again. What would you do if you discovered you had already loved someone in another life? If you discovered that the pain you carry isn't just your own? Comment down below. Other people need to know they aren't alone. The next day, they went to the museum. Professor Abernathy was waiting for them at the entrance. He led them through the silent corridors to a special room. The room dedicated to the American Revolutionary War period. And there, on a wall, was the portrait. Evelyn Marie de los Rios. 1780. Jonathan and Evelyn Marie stopped before the painting. The silence was absolute, because there, on the wall of a museum, was a 200-year-old painting. And the woman in the portrait was exactly like Evelyn Marie, not just similar, identical. The same hazel eyes, the same face shape, the same gentle smile, the same mark on the neck, clearly visible in the painting. Evelyn felt her legs give way. Jonathan caught her before she fell. The professor observed the scene in silence. Even he, a man of science, of facts, of logic, couldn't deny what his eyes were seeing. Two women, separated by 200 years, but who were inexplicably the same person. At that moment, something happened. Evelyn felt a wave of dizziness, stronger than any other, more overwhelming, as if the world around her was dissolving, as if time itself was folding. And then she saw, not the museum, not the portrait, not Jonathan beside her. She saw a night in 1820, a room illuminated by candlelight, a man in a military uniform sitting at a desk, writing with urgency, with despair, with love. She saw Sebastian. He had Jonathan's face, the same eyes, the same bearing, but younger, thinner, with the stubble of someone who hadn't slept in days. And she felt his love, his anguish, the fear that this was his last night. "My beloved Evelyn Marie," he wrote. The words flowed like tears. "When you read these words, I will already have departed for battle." Evelyn felt her own tears streaming down her face. She was there, in the memory, in the past, watching Sebastian write the letter that she would find 200 years later. "I will return for you," he wrote. "In this life or the next, my soul will find you." Sebastian finished the letter, folded it carefully, placed it inside the box along with his medal and her portrait, sealed it with the Ashworth family crest. And then he did something that Evelyn didn't expect. He closed his eyes and prayed. "God, if you exist, if there is something beyond this life, make it so that I find her again. No matter how many lives pass, no matter how long it takes, let my soul recognize hers. Let me fulfill this promise." Evelyn felt the weight of that prayer, felt the sincerity, the despair, the love so profound that it transcended death. And then, the vision changed. She saw the battle, an open field, horses, men screaming, blood. Sebastian was there, mounted on his horse and leading his men. And then, a shot. The bullet struck Sebastian in the chest, exactly where the medal was. He fell from his horse, onto the muddy and bloodied ground. Evelyn ran to him, as not physically, but in spirit, in memory, in soul. Sebastian looked up at the sky. His lips moved, forming silent words. "I will return for you," he whispered. "In this life or the next, my soul will find you." And then he closed his eyes and died. Evelyn felt the pain as if it were her own, because it had been her own. Evelyn Marie had received the news weeks later, had fallen to her knees, had screamed until she lost her voice. The vision shifted again. Evelyn saw a woman in black, sitting in a darkened room, looking at a sealed box. The same box that Jonathan would find 200 years later. Evelyn Marie was dying, not from illness, from a broken heart. She held the box as if it were the only thing that connected her to Sebastian, the only thing that remained. "He promised," she whispered. "He promised he would return." A maid approached. "Mrs. Eleanor, the doctor has asked you to rest." "I can't," Evelyn Marie said. "Not yet. I have to wait." The maid exchanged a look with another. They thought Mrs. Eleanor was losing her mind, but Evelyn Marie knew the truth. Sebastian would return. Maybe not in this life, but he would return. And she needed to be sure that when he returned, he would find the letter. She summoned the housekeeper, gave specific instructions. The box should be kept safe, passed down from generation to generation, sealed, untouched, until Sebastian returned. "How will we know when he returns, Mrs. Eleanor?" Evelyn Marie smiled, a sad smile full of certainty. "When he returns and the box will open. When he returns and he will find me. And when he finds me." She touched the mark on her neck. He will recognize this mark, because he was the one who left it, in another life, to find me in all the lives to come. The housekeeper nodded, uncomprehending, but obeying. 3 days later, Evelyn Marie de los Rios died. They say her last words were, "I will return for you. I will return for you." The same promise, made by two souls who refused to be separated. Evelyn opened her eyes. She was in the museum. Jonathan was holding her. The professor was looking at her with concern. "What happened?" Jonathan asked. Evelyn looked at him, saw Sebastian, saw the man who had died promising to return, saw the love that had traveled 200 years to find her. "I saw," she said. "I saw everything." "What did you see?" "The night he wrote the letter, the battle, his death, and me, Evelyn Marie, waiting, dying of longing. Jonathan felt tears in his own eyes. "Evelyn," he whispered. She looked at him, directly into his eyes, and for the first time since all this had begun, she had no more doubts. "And you," she said, "you returned, as you promised. If you're feeling something now, if something inside you recognizes this story, it's because some truths go beyond what we can explain. The golden heart of YouTube is right down there. When you click it, you're saying that you believe that some connections transcend time." Jonathan and Evelyn left the museum in silence. There was nothing more to say. The evidence was there. The letter, the portrait, the mark, the vision, the music that Evelyn had played without ever having learned it. Everything pointed to a single truth. They had loved each other before. And now, they had a second chance. But there was still an obstacle: society. Jonathan was one of the wealthiest men in the country. Evelyn was a housekeeper, an orphan, without family, without a name, in high society. This kind of relationship was unthinkable. Jonathan knew he would face criticism, judgments, maybe even loss of business. But when he looked at Evelyn, when he saw Evelyn Marie in her, when he felt the weight of 200 years of waiting, he made a decision. Nothing else mattered. Not money, not status, not what others thought. Only her. Only the promise that he could finally fulfill. That night, Jonathan did something he had never done. He went down to the servants' quarters, found Evelyn sitting on her simple bed, looking at her own hands, still processing everything she had seen. Jonathan knelt before her. Evelyn looked at him, surprised. "Sir, what are you doing?" "Don't call me sir," he said. "Never again. My name is Jonathan or Sebastian. Depends on which life you prefer." Isabella felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I know this is madness," Jonathan continued. "I know the world will judge us. I know they'll say I've lost my mind, that you're a gold digger, that all of this is impossible." He held her hands tightly. "But I also know that I've spent 200 years waiting for you, that my soul promised you I would return. And now that I've found you, I won't let anything separate us again, not society, not money, not even death itself." Evelyn couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face freely. "I loved you in 1820, Jonathan said. His voice trembled with emotion. "I died loving you. And now, 200 years later, I still love you. I've always loved you. In every life that came before. In every life that will come after." He looked deeply into her eyes. "Isabella. Evelyn Marie. It doesn't matter the name. Will you stay with me? In this life. In all the ones to come?" Evelyn gazed back at him. At the man who had crossed centuries to find her. At the soul that had recognized hers the moment their eyes met. She didn't need to think, not even for a second. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with certainty and the weight of centuries. "In all lives." Jonathan stood up. He pulled her close, and finally, after 200 years, their lips met. It was a kiss that carried centuries of longing. A kiss that echoed through the ages. A kiss that fulfilled a promise kept across time. A kiss that reunited two souls that were never meant to be apart. And somewhere beyond time, beyond space, beyond everything the human mind can comprehend, Sebastian Ashworth finally rested in peace. He had returned. He had found her. The promise was kept. Mrs. Eleanor watched from a distance. The old housekeeper had tears in her eyes. 50 years, she murmured to herself. 50 years guarding the secret, waiting for this moment. She looked up at the night sky, glittering with distant stars. "You can rest now, Miss Evelyn Marie," she said, a soft whisper in the night. "He's returned." just as he promised. But the story was far from over, because there was still one last test, a test that no one expected, a test that would change everything. The next morning, Professor Davies called Jonathan, his voice tinged with urgency. "You need to come to the museum immediately," he said. "We found something in the archives." Jonathan and Evelyn went together, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The professor was waiting for them in a research room. On the table, there were old documents, yellowed with age, fragile, with official seals from 200 years ago. "What is this?" Jonathan asked, a knot forming in his stomach. The professor looked at them with a strange expression, a mixture of awe, disbelief, and something that resembled fear. "When you left yesterday, I kept thinking," he said, his voice hesitant. Something didn't make sense. Sebastian died in battle. Evelyn Marie died years later. They never had children. The Ashworth lineage continued through a younger brother of Sebastian. Jonathan frowned, his eyes narrowing. "I know this, but then I wondered," the professor continued, pacing the room. "If they never had children, why was the box kept in the Ashworth estate? Why did Evelyn Marie give instructions for his family to guard the box? Why not her own family?" Jonathan looked at Evelyn. She seemed as confused as he was, her brow furrowed with concern. "I searched the archives," the professor said. "Documents from the era, civil records, certificates, and I found something." He handed a document to Jonathan. It was a birth certificate, dated 1820. Jonathan read it and felt the world around him spin. The certificate was for a girl, born in August of 1820, 3 months after Sebastian's death. The mother was Evelyn Marie de los Rios. The father was Captain Sebastian Ashworth. "They had a daughter," Jonathan whispered, his voice hoarse with shock. The professor nodded, a grave expression on his face. "A daughter that Evelyn Marie kept a secret, because the child was the fruit of a forbidden love with an enemy. If the truth were discovered, both would be condemned." Evelyn couldn't breathe. She was grasping for air. "What happened to the child?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The professor handed her another document. "The girl was raised in secret by the Ashworths," he explained. "Sebastian's younger brother, who inherited the fortune, adopted her as his own, gave her the family name. Bear protected her." Jonathan stared at the documents. His mind raced, connecting the pieces of the puzzle. "So, the entire Ashworth lineage after Sebastian actually descends," he began. "From him and Evelyn Marie," the professor completed. "You, Jonathan, you don't descend from Sebastian's brother. You descend from Sebastian himself and Evelyn Marie." The silence that followed was absolute. Jonathan looked at Evelyn, his eyes wide with realization. "I'm descended from them," he said, a tear escaping his eye. "From us. From who we were." Evelyn stared at the documents, at the definitive proof. The proof that linked everything. "Their daughter survived," she said, her voice filled with awe. "Their love wasn't in vain. And now you're here," the professor said, 200 years later, together again. As if the universe were correcting a mistake, as if history were finally being told the right way. Jonathan took Evelyn's hand, squeezing it tightly. "It's not correction," he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "It's completion. The story began in 1820, but only now is it ending." Evelyn looked at him, at the man who carried their blood. The blood of Sebastian and Evelyn Marie. The blood of a love that should never have been separated. And she understood. She understood everything. The universe hadn't just reunited two souls. It had reunited a family, a lineage, a love that stretched across 200 years, and that now, finally, could flourish without fear, without war, without social barriers, without premature death, only love. The same love as always, traversing time. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan did something that shocked high society. He announced his engagement to Evelyn. The newspapers made headlines. Millionaire to marry housekeeper. The comments were cruel, prejudiced, full of judgment. But Jonathan didn't care, not one bit. And neither did Evelyn, because they knew something that the world didn't. They knew that their love hadn't started in that mansion. It had started 200 years ago, in a time of war, between two enemies who chose love over hate. And now, finally, they could live it. The wedding took place 3 months later, in the same historic estate where Jonathan had found the box, in the same garden where Sebastian and Evelyn Marie had said goodbye for the last time. Mrs. Eleanor was the matron of honor, Professor Davies, the best man. The box that had guarded the letter for 200 years was placed on the altar, as a reminder, as a witness, as proof that true love always finds a way. When Jonathan said, "I do," he wasn't just marrying Evelyn. He was fulfilling a promise made 200 years ago. "I will return for you. In this life or the next, my soul will find you." He had returned. He had found her. The promise was fulfilled. Evelyn Marie wept as she spoke her own words. "I've waited for you," she said. In 2 lifetimes. For 8 years in one. For 28 in the other. And now, finally, the waiting is over. Jonathan took her hands. "You don't have to wait anymore," he said. "I am here. And this time, nothing will separate us." They exchanged rings, and when their lips met, something magical happened. A gentle breeze swept through the garden. The leaves of the old oak tree whispered, and for a moment, just a moment, everyone present felt something strange, a presence or two, as if Sebastian and Maria Isabella were there, watching, approving, finally at peace. Mrs. Eleanor looked up at the sky. "They are here," she murmured, and she was right. The souls who had loved each other and been torn apart were finally at rest, because the promise had been kept, because love had conquered time, because two people who should never have met had met anyway, against all odds, against all logic, against death itself. A few months after the wedding, Evelyn Marie discovered she was pregnant. The news brought tears of joy, but it also brought something more. One night, Evelyn Marie had a dream, not of Sebastian writing the letter, not of the battle, not of death. She dreamt of a little girl, a girl with hazel eyes, with a birthmark on her neck, running through a garden she recognized as the garden of the historic estate, but different, older. The girl looked at her and smiled. "You found me," the girl said. Evelyn Marie woke up crying, but they were tears of joy. She told Jonathan about the dream. He embraced her. "Our daughter," he said. "The daughter we had in 1820. The one who was raised in secret. The one we never got to see grow up." Evelyn Marie looked at her growing belly. "Do you think it's her?" she asked. "Coming back to us?" Jonathan thought for a long moment. "I think," he said finally, "that some families are so strong that not even death can tear them apart. I think that some souls choose to come back together, life after life, until they finally manage to stay together without interruption." Evelyn Marie rested her head on his shoulder. "Then this time," she said, "we'll do it differently. This time, we'll watch her grow. We'll be present. We'll give her everything we couldn't give her before." Jonathan kissed her forehead. "This time," he promised. "Nothing will interrupt us." 9 months later, a little girl was born. Hazel eyes, a birthmark on her neck, identical to the photos of Maria Isabella as a young woman. Jonathan and Evelyn Marie looked at their daughter and wept, not with sadness, with joy, with recognition, with gratitude. Because finally the family was complete. Finally the story had a happy ending. Finally the promise was no longer just about two lovers. It was about a whole family, reunited through time. They named her Maria, in honor of Maria Isabella, in honor of the mother who couldn't raise her the first time, in honor of the love that had spanned centuries. Mrs. Eleanor held the baby in her arms. "Welcome back, little one," she whispered. "You took 200 years, but you're finally home." The story shouldn't exist. The evidence shouldn't be there. The letter shouldn't have survived. The box shouldn't have opened. Everything should have been forgotten in time, but it wasn't. Because some stories refuse to be forgotten. Because some promises are too strong to be broken. Because some souls are connected in ways that go beyond any explanation. Jonathan kept the letter in a special place, framed, protected, with an inscription below. "I will return for you. In this life or the next, my soul will find you." Promise made in 1820. Promise fulfilled in 2025. 200 years of waiting. An eternity of love. Every night, before going to sleep. Jonathan looked at that frame, at the trembling words written by candlelight 200 years ago, at the promise that had started everything, and every night. He gave thanks. He thanked fate for having returned, for having found her, for finally being able to live the love that war had stolen. Evelyn Marie also looked at the letter, and every night. She also gave thanks. She thanked fate for not having given up, for having waited, for having believed, even when it didn't make sense, because her faith had been rewarded, because the wait had been worth it, because love had won. You have just heard a story that transcends time, a story about two souls who refused to give up on each other, a story about a promise that took 200 years to fulfill. If you've made it this far, if you felt something hearing these words, it's because you understand. You understand that true love knows no limits. You understand that some connections go beyond what we can explain. You understand that, perhaps you, just perhaps, you also have someone waiting for you, somewhere, sometime. Comment down below. Have you ever felt an inexplicable connection with someone? Have you ever met someone and felt like you already knew them? Have you ever looked into the eyes of a stranger and seen familiarity? Those sensations aren't madness. They are memories. Memories of other lives. Memories of other loves. Memories that travel through time waiting to be recognized. Just as Jonathan and Evelyn Marie recognized each other. Just as Sebastian and Maria Isabella reunited. Just as two soulmates always find each other. No matter how long it takes. No matter how many lifetimes pass. True love always finds a way. And the promise was fulfilled, years later. When little Maria was already running through the garden of the historic estate, Jonathan found something else. He was organizing the family's old documents when he discovered a second seal, a second box, smaller, more hidden. Inside, there was another letter, but this one wasn't from Sebastian. It was from Maria Isabella, written days before her death. Jonathan read it with tears in his eyes. "My beloved Sebastian," the letter began. "I know you will return. I feel it in my soul, and when you return, I will be waiting. Not here, not in this body that is already tired, but somewhere else, sometime else, in another life. I have left instructions for our daughter to be cared for. She carries our love. She is proof that what we had was real. And through her, our blood will continue, generation after generation, until you return. When you find this letter, know that I never doubted. Know that I waited. Know that every night I dreamed of you. Know this, my last thought will always be your name. I will return for you too. I will return for you as well. Because if you can cross death to find me, then I can do the same. We will find each other again, and this time, nothing will tear us apart. With all the love I've carried since our first glance, yours always, Evelyn Marie, forever. Jonathan showed the letter to Evelyn. She read it and wept. I wrote this, she said. I remember. Not the writing, but the feeling, the believing, the certainty. Jonathan held her close. You waited for me, he said. 200 years. And I finally came. Evelyn looked at him, at their daughter playing in the garden, at the life they finally had together. And it was worth it, she said. Every second of waiting, every lifetime of longing. It was all worth it. Jonathan kissed her forehead. And now, he said, we can finally live without war, without separation, without fear. Evelyn smiled. Together, she said, as it always should have been. Jonathan gazed at the garden, at the ancient oak tree, beneath which Sebastian and Evelyn Marie had said their goodbyes so long ago, at their daughter, who was living proof of their enduring love. And he understood. He understood that some stories need time to be told. He understood that some promises need centuries to be fulfilled. He understood that some souls are born connected and remain connected, no matter what. And he understood that he was living proof of it all. Sebastian had promised, and Jonathan had delivered. 2 lives, 1 soul, 1 promise. I will return for you. I returned for you. And now, we are together. Forever.